Welcome. There's, I think we should get started because we're trying to maintain the time. I'm Hazel Marcus. I'm the Rixry Director. That's the Research Institute of the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. And one of our main functions is putting on these wonderful faculty seminar. And I'm here to welcome you to this year's first seminar. And before we introduce today's wonderful speaker, I just want to alert you to the pages in the middle of the table here, so you pay attention to upcoming events. We try not to bombard you with too many announcements. Now we have our digest that comes, so you should be looking for that for events. But I want to alert you to the next seminar, which is November 6th, which will be our own Gary Segura, and this will be right after the election, and he's promised us some, up to the minute data about what happened there as we talk about America's most dynamic population. I think he sort of threw down the challenge there. I'm not sure we have to accept it, but we'll see. Should we? Oh, what, Professor Moya? We have to just and okay, there. Whatever we mean by dynamic, yes, but I think it's fun. Anybody else have anything they would like to bring up or alert us to? Welcome to everybody. Welcome to we had a wonderful fellows meeting yesterday, our first one. We've got a terrific group of people, and we're off to a great start. So, anything else? If not, I'll turn it over to Jose David, who can do the honors for today.
Good afternoon, and I too would like to welcome everybody to our first autumn RICS seminar, and I'd like to thank Professor Marcus and Dr. Hamadani for putting this together. And really, I'm just here I have the great honor of introducing our speaker, and I'm delighted to do that. Deb Vargas received her PhD in sociology with an emphasis in feminist studies, and I think you kind of did some work not only with Rosalina Fragoso and people at Santa Cruz, but also Angela Davis. Her research and teaching specialties include Chicano and Chicana Latina cultural studies, critical race feminisms, queer of color critique, popular culture, oral history methods, and what we could call today pensamiento fronterizo, border thinking, border studies, borderland studies, border sonics, right? Pensamiento sónico or something. Presently, Dr. Vargas is an associate professor of ethnic studies and director of graduate studies, which is always a good thing to do for all the grad students here, to work closely with your graduate director at the University of California, Riverside. Her book, Dissonant Divas in Chicana Music, and I have a copy of it here if people want to peruse it. The Limits of La Onda, published recently by the University of Minnesota Press, 2012, draws on Chicana feminism, cultural studies, and queer of color analysis to examine the ways in which Chicana singers push the heteronormative limits of what Professor Vargas calls the sonic imaginaries of Borderlands music. She's now working, I think, on a couple of projects. She's doing a book, a co-edited book on the key terms in Latina studies. And I think I read that you're doing a biography of the Chicana rock and roll singer, Gloria Rios, which is always a good thing to read. I recently had the pleasure of reading Deborah's book with great interest, and I've been reading her work as it appears in print in journals such as Women in Performance, Feminist Studies, Aslan, I think American Quarterly, and I'd recommend take a look at her great essays in there. Dissonant Divas explores the musical performances of Chicana iconic women singers and musicians such as Chelo Silva, from Brownsville, Texas, where Ramon and I are from. And reading this book kind of took me back to my upbringing in South Texas, and the same kind of musical sites, churches, and different places. Eva Ibarra, Eva Garza, I think they're from a little bit further up north in Texas. The cultural capital of Texas is San Antonio. And of course, the iconic singer Selena, within Tejano Mexican-American musical kind of sonics of analysis. She ends her award-winning book by looking at the San Antonio punk band Girl in a Coma. So go to YouTube or go to iTunes download that right away. Professor Vargas discusses the singers and musicians, including accordionists, the dissonant divas, whose representation of gender and sexuality are irreconcilable within canonical Chicano music, or what she refers to simply as la onda. Incorporating ethnographic fieldwork, oral history, archival fever, I think she also comes up with the term archichisme, archive gossip, into her study, demonstrating how these singers work together to explore the limits of Chicano, Mexican, and American identifications and identities. Last year, Dissonant Divas won the Woody Guthrie Award for Outstanding Book on Popular Music, presented by the International Association for the Study of Popular Music, and also won the National Association of Chicano and Chicana Studies Knox Award for Outstanding Book. And again, it deserves all those prizes and more, Deborah, for the work you've done. Now here's my pitch. A new book, a new published essay, or a new talk by Professor Vargas tends to be something of an event in our field Imaginaries. The field being not only Chicano and Chicana studies, but also sociology and feminist and queer of color studies. Deb's beautifully written book and all of her work have great impact, cause intelligent discussion, and provoke lots of debate. The talk today is called Listening to Chicana Singers, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Professor Vargas to CCSRE, to Rixry, and to Stanford.
Well, thank you to everyone for coming out. I'm a little bit conscious of time, so I want to make sure that I get through this and leave some time for some Q&A. I want to start off by thanking the faculty and staff of the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, and especially a heartfelt thanks to Professor Jose Saldivar for extending this really warm, generous invitation to campus to share my book. Like one of the perks in receiving these invitations is that I get to share, parts of the book with so many scholars who are implicitly and sometimes more explicitly woven throughout the pages of this book, and so many of them are here in this room, and so it's a really great honor to be able to talk about this book in the presence of so many voices and so many visions and imaginaries. So today I want to focus on 3 of the singers that I write about in my book, and I begin with 2 anecdotes. Anecdote 1. It's a hot, humid morning in Houston, Texas in the post-Selena era. I'm standing at the front door of the home of Lydia Mendoza, having arrived with Matt Watson, a sound engineer, who's traveled from the Smithsonian in DC to record another installation of oral history interviews for the museum's Latino Music Oral History Project. We're here because since Selena's passing, the Smithsonian has become motivated to add Mexican-American women singers to this oral history project. This oral history would result in the first Mexican-American woman singer to be archived at the Smithsonian. Anecdote 2. I have just completed a talk on Selena at a music symposium. After the panel ended, I chatted with an audience member who wanted to follow up on a comment I made asserting the amount of critical analysis still left to be done on singers who came before Selena. He wanted to know who I thought was worthy of such attention. I mentioned several names. His response, I've never heard of any of them. What did they accomplish? I mean, they're not Lydia Mendoza or anything. I begin with these anecdotes because they typify moments that shaped my methodological journey in locating, analyzing, and listening to Chicana singers, and the normative nationalist gendered projects that have sought to contain Mendoza and Selena's cultural production as the 20th century musical bookends of Mexican-American women in music. Such exclusive and contained attention on Mendoza and Selena represents what I refer to as a gendered politics of exceptional exemptions. In other words, the few women who are considered exceptional enough to represent the exemptions to the rules of music historiographic practices. Exceptional exemptions have a place in master narratives of Chicano and cultural studies texts. I'm sorry, I skipped a few slides here. In texts such as these, that reproduced the key musical figures, genres, and geographic limits. So for example, the Texas-Mexican sounds of accordion-driven conjunto music, rendered almost exclusively through masculinist narratives and configurations of rural regionality, or for example, Chicano rock, dominated by West Coast historical analysis of the Los Angeles-based East Side Sound. In Dissonant Divas, I critically approach Chicano music less as a defining category in my attempts to hear through and around its master sound, and more precisely through the music's formation of sonic imaginaries by and about Mexican descent peoples whose social identities and subjectivities are shaped in relationship to, but not exclusively by, systems of power within the US nation state. My notion of sonic imaginaries is analytically informed by Alicia Schmidt Camacho's theorizations of social imaginaries. That is, the idea of cultural forms not merely as a reflection of the social, but rather the means by which subjects work through their connections to a larger totality and communicate a sense of relatedness to a particular time, place, and condition. During the 20th century, sonic imaginaries have been produced by musical compilations, folklore studies, and public cultural histories, including documentaries such as Songs of the Homeland, museum exhibits, and movies such as La Bamba, The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez, and most recently, the Hollywood biopic Selena, the movie. Such projects, I argue, reinforce a heteronormative construction of Chicano borderlands music, a musically sounded circuit assembled through the elisions, rescriptions, and normative reductions of Chicana genders and sexualities. A queer feminist analytic I call diva dissonance is thus my attempt to listen through such disciplinary projects and against the trappings of having relatively unfamiliar singing subjects become simply a site of recovery. Rather, this analytic is concerned with what has activated Chicana singers' illegibility and inaudibility within canonical music projects. Because I argue that it is within this dissonance, that is, the chismes, the unfit instrumental bodies, and the unlikely geographic scales where Chicano music potentially propels sonic imaginaries, that Chicana feminist cultural theorists have argued are new tropes for subjectivities in flux, and sites of theoretical praxis for queer cultural productions. As such, considering the sonic borderlands imaginaries produced by these singers requires complicating what is understood as music, what assembles music history, by listening to music through what has often been left off stage and off page. Accordingly, diva dissonance requires rigorously engaging music through promiscuous performances, non-empirical recollections, and seemingly incompatible geographic places where such singers have remained in endless, inaudible rotation. There is perhaps no better example of the power of heteromasculine gender in the sonic imaginary of borderlands music than that of corrido music, discursively configured through battles over territory, interethnic conflict, and cultural resistance to racism. Corrido studies hold such a prominent place in the canon of Chicano music and cultural studies that it is arguably has received the most sustained recovery and analytic attention by Chicano music, literary, and folklore scholars. By extension, no other scholar has come to represent corrido studies more eminently than Americo Paredes, who theorized the corrido as a musical narrative device and as the border ballad of Greater Mexico. In fact, no scholarly engagement, public exhibit, or musical analysis of corridos can escape what many Chicano studies scholars have deemed the most influential book in Chicano cultural studies. Americo Paredes' with his pistol in his hand, a border ballad, and its hero. Published on the eve of the Chicano civil rights era and based on the early 20th century corrido, The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez, honoring the heroic Cortez who stood up to the racist Texas Rangers, with his pistol remains one of the most allegorized texts of Mexicano cultural resistance to Anglo racist supremacy. So close is this link between author scholarship and the production of corrido heroic masculinity that Paredes himself becomes a latter 20th century academic version of Gregorio Cortés, as exemplified in this well-known quote by literary scholar José Limón, who states, Mr. Paredes and his book become like a corrido and a hero for a new generation of Chicano social activists of the 60s who recognize the legendary fighting qualities of the two men, Cortés and Paredes. There were times in listening to Chelo Silva's music that I attempted to tune out Paredes' grand presence in my life, having walked the very campus where Paredes built his career, and in Silva's life, where Paredes remained what Avery Gordon has called a ghostly matter. Yet I continually found Paredes inescapable in listening to Silva's music and in my attempts to narrate her life. What I finally understood was that making sense of Silva's musical dissonance in Chicano music wasn't about disconnecting her from Paredes, but about maneuvering through the sounds of corrido masculinity that I believe resound Silva's story. Consuelo Chelo Silva was born the eldest daughter of 7 children in Brownsville, Texas in 1922. A gifted vocalist from a very young age, Silva garnered great local attention for her strong vocals and mastery at substantiating each song with depth and realism, what Mexican bolero songwriter Emma Elena Valdelamar defines as a distinction between a singer and the skill of a bolero interpreter. In the late 1930s, a young Silva would garner the attention of a local notable in Brownsville, host of a local program called El Músico y Poeta. His name was Americo Paredes. Paredes' radio show offered Silva a regional radio circuit, and the musical fusion between them would result in a passionate union, resulting in marriage about a year after they met in 1939. Silva would bear Paredes' first son and namesake, Americo Paredes Jr., but their union would end soon thereafter. This end was a symbolic prelude to the unique musical journeys each would take. As Ramon Saldívar asserts in his book on Americo Paredes, and I quote, Consuelo Silva, it seemed, was not going to offer either the consolation or comfort promised by her name. Paredes, in turn, was not able to deal with a woman like Silva. My interviews with Silva's sister, Angelica, included similar comments on the excess of Silva's gender and sexuality that Paredes' presence in her life could not master. In the words of Angelica Silva, he was a power, but he couldn't contain her. As Borderlands subjects, Silva and Paredes come to literally produce and discursively embody 2 unique cultural modes of Borderlands knowledge production, the corrido and the bolero. Paredes chose the pen, Silva chose the microphone. Silva's musical career along the U.S.-Mexico border and across Mexico would place her among Mexico's most notable boleristas. Paredes' musical aspirations transitioned as he turned toward writing and eventually a university teaching career. As sonic texts, the bolero and the corrido offer distinct configurations of power and empowerment in the soundings of Borderlands Imaginaries. The corrido conveys modes of cultural resistance, while the bolero finds flight from material struggles of the present through dramatic betrayals and expressions of queer desires. In my chapter, I follow Ramon Saldívar's assertion that corridos represent social symbolic texts that engage readers in an alternative reconstruction of Texas border history, to ask then what reconstructions of histories, truths, and pasts might we imagine in other musical sounds that remain in the echoes of corrido masculinity. What I learned through my frustrating attempts to negotiate what some might refer to as the noise of awkward silences and gossip in conversations and interviews with Silva's family and friends was that Silva's story has been sounding clearly all along, reconstructing historical memories and generating bodily recollections too often muted or repaired in the imaginaries of Chicano canonical texts. My chapter argues then that Silva's Bolero songbook be considered her border ballad, her narrative device for reimagining power, not merely through battles over geographic territory, heroic masculine deeds, and racial subordination, but a border ballad that re-narrates discourses of colonized territories through the racist sexualization of women of color bodies. What might we find then in the border histories and Borderlands imaginaries sounded in Silva's boleros? Perhaps that vessels are as power-ridden as bullets, that there is truth in what is not said, and that the power of music is not in its function as a lyrical device of resistance, but maybe as a modality of submission to unspeakable desires and sexual acts. Such is the case in the following performance, a few years before Silva's death, where Silva profoundly sings back to rumors and judgments about her life and about the way she lived her life. I can say much more about this in the Q&A, but one key element right as introducing the clip here is that you'll hear Silva's voice very worn out from age and illness, but nonetheless, what you will hear is a performance of this very distinct skill of a bolerista and their interpretation of song, particularly utilizing the improvisation skills that she was really well known for, and that were part of this kind of bolero repertoire, for changing the lyrics of the original recorded version in this live concert performance. If you want to know what has become of my life, sings Silva, then simply ask me.
Y para todos y cada uno de ustedes. Que no te cuenten historias, no indagues qué es de mi vida. Si quieres saberla, pregúntame a mí. Que no te vengan con cuentos. Si tienes valor para oírlos, yo puedo decirte por qué me perdí. Se sufre mucho en la vida y nunca se aprende que cuando un cariño nos paga mal, es fácil equivocarse pensando que entre las copas está el remedio para olvidar.
Apologize for the rough transition here.
Yo como muchos me equivoqué y entre copa y copa también te olvidé, pero fue inútil, ahora lo sé, porque al día siguiente te volví a querer y te buscaba y no te encontraba y para olvidarte volví a beber. Y me gustan grandotes, aunque me rompan el higo la boca. Por eso es que ahora te bebo tanto, ten por seguro que ya te olvidé.
This would be Chelo Silva's last major live performance and exemplifies the sexual excess and irreverence that has generated much of her dissonance in Chicano musical narratives. Silva's performance of Pregúntame a mí represents both the power of her songbook in conveying a border ballad that refuses normative Chicana womanhood, as it simultaneously conveys the sexual empowerment of bolero performance as her sonic apparatus for conveying other kinds of conflict and struggle that have reverberated inharmoniously within the masculinist imaginaries of Chicano music. It is my hope that Dissonant Divas not only illuminates alternative Borderlands imaginaries by considering the lives and musics of relatively unacknowledged Chicana singers, such as Silva and others in my book, and others that didn't even make the book, actually, but also to prompt us to listen differently to musics we may assume to know too well. Such is the case with the now oversaturated sounds of Selena. When Selena was tragically killed in 1995, I was struck as a fan of her music by how the media attempted to make sense of her music as reduced to either a voiceless performing body or as a pop crossover singer. That is, reducing the English language CD Dreaming of You that she was completing at the time of her death, following the normative and assumed inevitable assimilationist progression of brown bodies within a US context, very familiar to social science studies. Such crossover discourse, the notion of moving discreetly from one musical form to another, from one language to another, from one listening audience to another, reinforces the racialized project of music genres constructed through heteronormative discourses of gender and sexuality. Thus, in Dissonant Divas, I propose that we listen to Selena again, to her sonic imaginary that I refer to as brown soul, an African diasporic or black sound as never distinct from her performance of queer gender and sexuality. Selena's brown soul unsettles the structural systems of racial discourse that have upheld blackness at the limits of Chicano Borderlands music, and sonically imagines the Borderlands as activated through black sound. In other words, brown soul is discordant to Selena's crossover sound, an idea that reduces her singing subjectivity to a Spanish language singer whose only legibility as an English language pop star cannot register as black sound. Thus, my analysis of Selena's brown soul brings to the fore the black sound that is central to Selena's distinct music and queer performance aesthetics, especially through what would become her signature moves in music, through cumbia music. The very musical moves that Deborah Pacini Hernandez reminds us partly emerged through the Afro-Colombian music styles on the Atlantic coast in the mid-1930s and 40s. I suggest that Selena's diverse musical repertoire, moving from Spanish language ballads and cumbias to English language freestyle and R&B ballads, are not discrete or progressive moves towards an American musical crossover, but rather a sonic imaginary propelled by black diasporic sound. In other words, I argue that Selena's brown soul sounds against the illusions of blackness in the nation-making musical projects of Mexicanidad and Chicanidad. Listening to Selena's brown soul through songs such as Tecnocumbia, that is arguably one, if not the earliest cumbia to include rap lyrics, takes us on a musical U-turn, whereby the circulation of her music across Mexican America to the Caribbean, throughout Mexico and further south, or not merely in conversation with black music, but part of black sonic movements across the Americas. Selena's cumbias, como La Flor, Amor Prohibido, La Carcacha, among others, moved Selena across uncharted Tex-Mex geographies, just as her cumbia sounds moved brown bodies across horizons of queer desire. Selena's brown soul thus necessitates a different listening that prompts a different moving. Her brown soul recalibrates our Borderlands imaginaries by moving our bodies through the black sound circulating through a cumbia like Bitty Bitty Bum Bum that's never disconnected from an R&B ballad like Missing My Baby. In other words, her brown soul activates a Borderlands sonic imaginary where a Spanish language Mexican song like La Bamba and 1980s freestyle music actually make total black sonic sense. I want to exemplify this very point through a brief segment of Selena's first live music performance in Mexico in 1987. Recalling for you, of course, or for many of us, not for me and my generation, but that Selena had never before this moment performed live before a Mexican audience, nor was Spanish her first language. And I apologize for the very grainy clip. It's the 1980s, taped on But what is key here, just to contextualize, is Selena is part of the Johnny Canales show. For people of my generation, for a new artist to appear on Johnny Canales would have been like appearing on American Bandstand or Soul Train or something. For those of you born after 1990, MTV's 106 in Park or something. The brief clip is midway, so I'm really just playing a very brief clip of her La Bamba rendition. But I'm playing this precisely to kind of highlight the classic freestyle percussion breaks in this cover of La Bamba. So here you see a very young, very 80s style Selena and Los Dinos performing their La Bamba. You'll also see a few of her freestyle moves. Right here, that's real key to this cover. Get the idea. So La Bamba, is now a very iconic Chicano song. Mostly because of the rock and roll hit covered by Richie Valens in the mid 1950s, and it's also designated as one of Mexico's national folkloric songs. Yet what is often elided in both of these nationalist narratives is that La Bamba is precisely an Afro-Mexicano son jarocho. And there's a lot of really good recent scholarship it's really engaging in this area, this history, and really bringing to the fore a lot of this really critical conversation about son jarocho music transnationally from Mexico to the U.S. and beyond. In this performance of La Bamba, Selena's brown soul moves with black diasporic sound, thereby propelling a Borderlands imaginary that opposes blackness as distinct from or merely fused with nationalist projects of Mexican and Chicano music. This becomes clear when we re-listen to La Bamba through the song that comes before it during this performance. What Selena and her band actually begin their playlist with. Playing these songs in reverse order, not only functions to highlight the point I'm trying to make here, but also demonstrates the ways that Selena's musical sound is often misread through this crossover discourse. That her Spanish language music was merely part of the progression to English language pop. Rather, I believe that Selena produces a brown soul through this cover of La Bamba that is in black sonic harmony with this song.
Selena y los Dinos de Corpus Christi, Texas. Take it away, Selena. Let's go. Get it.
You did me wrong, didn't know what to do. But baby, I'm strong, I'll get over you. A new boy I'm gonna choose. You'll see.
Anyone want to out themselves with a freestyle? Yeah, okay. Win the prize. This first song on their playlist is a cover. It's Selena's cover of Joni Watley's Looking for a New Love. So this is what the playlist Live in Mexico begins with, right? Released in 1987, the song became the benchmark sound of freestyle music, a music now recognized by scholars as one uniquely generated by 1980s urban working class queer youth of color rebelling against the oppressive economic and health policies of the state. And so we must listen to Selena again, to the ways Looking for a New Love does not merely precede Selena's La Bamba, but actually sonically prescribes it. In other words, this playlist is an early demonstration of the soundings of Selena's brown soul, forming a sonic Borderlands Imaginaries where cumbias are no longer distinct from disco, that are no longer distinct from R&B ballads, that are no longer distinct from freestyle. Her brown soul shatters our movements to Chicano musical sound. So let us listen to Selena again and accept her invitation to sonically imagine and queerly move to the black sounds in her brown soul. Learning to listen for Chicana singers has taken me to numerous places, metaphorically and geographically, that I did not expect. Working my way through and around what I call Chicano music's vato vernacular, that is, the played out dude talk of who was where and who did what first, taught me a great deal about the dailiness of gender and sexual politics that these singers faced as they navigated through the structural systems of difference to find a gig and to fulfill their joys and desires for performing. Their lives also motivated me to remain committed to the complicatedness of their gender and class politics by working against cleaning up the contradictions in their life choices. Rather, my book has attempted to honor the risks and uneven journeys that they took, trusting the unpredictable excursions their music would take me on. And such was the journey of my listening to a South Texas Chicana in a place and through voices I never imagined.
Sabor de engaño tienen tus ojos cuando me miras. Sabor de engaño siento en tus labios cuando me besas. No eres sincero
En tus ojos cuando me miran.
Mira, ahorita
Ay, sí me gustaba mucho, yo me la sé. Por de engaño tienen tus labios cuando me besan.
esa pegó bien fuerte aquí
Sí,
esta
sí.
canción.
No eres sincero cuando me dices que aún me amas. Y en tus palabras se nota el filo de la traición.
Mira, esta es su foto de ella.
Bueno, mírala aquí.
Sí.
Imposible seguir viviendo de esa manera. Ay, cómo no. Yo te agradezco con todo el alma tu noble empeño y te prometo sentirme fuerte cuando me digas que no me amas, que se romperá tu corazón.
Sí, se la sabe bien.
Sí, sí,
hombre.
porque me encantaba ella. Por eso.
Sabor de engaño tienen tus ojos cuando me miran. Sabor de engaño siento en tus labios cuando me besan. No eres sincera cuando me dices que aún me quieres. Si en tus palabras se nota el frío de la traición. No me es posible seguir viviendo de esta manera. Yo te agradezco con todo el alma tu noble empeño y te prometo portarme fuerte cuando me digas que no me amas, que es para otra tu corazón. Que no me amas, que es para otra tu corazón. Yo estoy hasta media cantada, tú me haces hacer
All
cosas.
right. In La Habana, Cuba, following Eva Garza's fragmented narratives based on family memories and pieces of discographies that I compiled across the U.S., Southwest, and Mexico. What I knew from her sister, Tina, was that Garza, born in 1917 in San Antonio, made her initial visit to Cuba in 1946 and would live in La Habana for 7 years, for months at a time, performing under various contracts. What I learned on this journey with Garza, and what I learned also about listening to Chicana music exceeded my research plan. Cubanas like Flora and Carmen featured here in my very low-tech video production that I actually take great pleasure in calling a failed ethnography, and I'm happy to talk about what that means during the Q&A. Reminded me quite profoundly that locating Eva Garza was not merely about looking in the right places and asking the right questions, but about embracing the indirect ways Garza is still making music. It was nearly 6 decades since Eva Garza recorded Sabor de Engaño, or Taste of Betrayal, that became one of her biggest bolero hits in the early 1950s. Sabor de Engaño recounts the temporalities of love and deceit, of lingering pains requiring closure, as the lyrical protagonist directly engages the deceitful lover and instead of offering forgiveness, insists on an end to their union, yet an end that would bear the lingering tastes of betrayal. It seemed no matter who I queried, from hotel staff to Cuban musicologists, the name Eva Garza did not initially trigger descriptions of great vocals or remarkable performance. Rather, what her name did immediately bodily retrieve were the lingering lyrics that remain Garza's musical testimony in Cuba. In my chapter, I chose to begin Garza's narrative in La Habana because it is precisely a beginning among many in Garza's life, a place most dissimilar to the geographic locations of the U.S. Southwest and West Coast that have sustained the canonical sounds of Chicano music. La Habana is Garza's Borderlands. Rather than representing missing pieces to a normative Chicano historical narrative, my research on Garza revealed the necessity to engage her subjectivity and musical sound through a nonlinear listening analytic, one that conveys a sonic imaginary alternative to the south to north Mexican migration models dominant in Chicano studies and more broadly in the social sciences. Informed by Chicana cultural studies and borderlands theories of transfrontera and transfronteriza, that is, the geopolitical spaces in which Mexican descent peoples manufacture new social relations, cultural productions, and contact zones that challenge nationalist discourses of identity and culture, I propose a feminist listening analytic that I refer to as a transfrontera musical compass. And here I'm drawing on the notion of compass not as the device that is magnetically fixed on the north, but according to its meaning with regards to song. That is a compass that marks the range of sound, of musical sound notes by a voice or a musical instrument. It is my contention that the reproduction of heteronormative spatial temporal logics have sealed Chicano musical imaginaries along a south to north geographic axis through a musical historiography almost entirely demarcated by the US-Mexico border and as one dominated by tropes of territorialization and class resistance. Listening to Garza's music and life stories through a transfrontera musical compass designates a feminist analysis of Garza's music and life narratives along multiple spatial temporalities where she has gone unregistered. It is a spatial temporal compass that charts Garza's musical life through various incomplete and incompatible times and places, what Mary Pat Brady refers to as those spatial temporal moments that disrupt national borders and national imaginaries as fixed in time. This transfrontera musical compass directs us to new soundings of Chicano borderlands imaginaries, configured through the sensualities of Garza's transnational bolero sphere of cabaretera cinematic circuits, recording and radio performances broadcast from New York City, and even performances throughout the eastern region of Cuba. Garza's voice stretched time and place through radio broadcasts originating from XCW and XEQ in Mexico City that early on reached Spanish language listeners as far north as Los Angeles and San Antonio. And in fact, Los Angeles radio stations served as somewhat of a broadcast adapter that would take these broadcasts and then rebeam them throughout the US Southwest, and sometimes on a good frequency all the way to parts of the Midwest. To be sure, Garza's voice was not exceptionally unique or supreme in the manner required of musicians and singers who become the masters or the genre shifters that usually is what garners one's entry into a canonical history. Garza was extraordinarily ordinary, a Chicana who lived life constantly traveling for musical gigs, had her children raised by her sister, and chose to be buried in a place she was not born in, but made home in Mexico City. Thus, the power of Garza's Chicano musical performance is in its demand of the listener, the historian, the curator, to be led by misdirection, and to trust the unpredictable voices making possible the production of Borderlands' sonic imaginary in seemingly dissimilar geographic contact zones. Imaginaries following a compass that disregards the limits of Chicano musical homeland. In the research that I've conducted, too many Chicana singers are ever present, yet too out of place and in too many fragments to fit normative temporalities of Chicano musical citizenship and the homeland as El Norte. Metaphorically, these singers register as Chicanas who are out of time and out of place for normative legibility. Their music and life narratives push the sonic limits of canonical music projects that have come to constitute Chicano music through heteronormative constructions of gender and family, teleologies of cultural resistance, and fixed notions of musical archives. So in the spirit of reimagining the borderlands by unlearning to follow established narratives and learning to listen to what may sound too familiar, I want to close with a beginning, recalling the first day I ever listened to Eva Garza. Because the experience persistently brought me back to the political stakes as well as the methodological challenges that I encountered throughout the process of writing this book. Eva Garza entered my sonic orbit of Borderlands music during one of the many days I'd spent conducting an oral history interview with singer Rita Vidauri. She expressed to me that no music research of mine would be complete without including Eva Garza. She passed away a long time ago, but I can call her sister for you, Vidauri said. After Vidauri placed a call to Garza's sister, Tina Moore, she gave me her address and I accepted it with some hesitation because I was an overly confident graduate student who at that time thought I knew everything about music in my hometown of San Antonio, where Garza was born. I showed up to Moore's home the next day. After knocking on the front door for a few minutes, she opened it and without even asking my name, said, "Hi, I'm Tina. I've been waiting for you to listen to my sister's story. Come in." Scattered across Tina Moore's kitchen table was an amazing archive that she had held together with Scotch tape and Elmer's glue, assembled in photo albums, stashed in shoeboxes, and squeezed into manila envelopes. There was Eva Garza, suspended in time, narrated through various fragments of ephemera, in every place, and yet so out of place in my acquired education of Chicano music. There she was, sounding a Borderlands imaginary, waiting for someone to listen. Thank you.
she went down to